come up with an opinion that will serve people. Come up with a hot take and share that and build your brand on that. Like that's an opportunity, right? And it's like, you don't have to just be anti something. What about being pro something else?
Yeah.
And then now you've got a brand opportunity there, right? Tell me what you're for then.
What does it really mean to be a thought leader in B2B? That's what we're here to find out. This is the Notorious Thought Leader, a podcast for B2B marketers who want to generate demand by creating content that builds credibility and thought leadership. In each episode, Erin Balsa helps demystify thought leadership and uncovers how companies are using thought leadership to generate demand. Let's get started.
My guest today is Devin Bramhall, who you might know as the former CEO of the content marketing agency Animals. Thanks for being here today, Devin.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, of course. I'm so glad to speak with you. So before we get into the nitty-gritty about thought leadership and content marketing, I'm sure the listeners would love to know, what exactly have you been doing these past few months since leaving your role at Animals?
Well, primarily not much on purpose, and it's amazing. Yeah, I took some time off, sort of. I went traveling. I went to Lisbon with my good friend Chad from Boston for the Web Summit, although I didn't actually go to the Web Summit. I just hung out with Web Summit people. So spent some time on Pink Street and some restaurants talking to tech people. And then I went to Hamburg and hung out with some friends, traveled, went to Berlin. And I've been making homemade ornaments, spending time with my dog, hanging out with my friends.
I love it.
It's been amazing. And during that time, as you would expect, when you make an announcement, a lot of people came to me looking for help for, people growing their agencies, people needing help with content strategy. So I was doing a little bit of that over the fall, just took some projects that seemed interesting to me. I called it my curiosity phase. So I was just sort of exploring what seemed interesting to me to figure out kind of what I wanted to do next. Obviously, Animals is still and was very near and dear to my heart. And so I had no idea what I was going to do after and didn't really want to decide right away because it's similar to a long-term relationship. You can't or I couldn't, based on how much of myself I'd invested in the company and the people. I needed some time to figure it out. And I will say after 4-ish months of curiosity and doing whatever I felt like, whenever I felt like it, which PS was amazing, I realized I still am not, my path is with me still. And so I found some cool companies to work with. I'm having a blast. I was kind of worried. I was like, do I even want to do this anymore? Am I just like the old granny of content marketing? Like, am I kind of done here? But I'm not. I'm having a really good time doing some advising, working on a couple of consulting projects. And I'm really busy, but I'm okay with it. It's cool. So it's sort of a time. This is the year of Devin. I have some other projects on the side that will be coming out next year. So yeah, it's a nice mix of like consulting, advising, which is keeping me fresh and interested and just like close to the work, close to what's going on. And then some side projects with a couple of my friends coming out next year.
Well, I will give you the opportunity to tease those if you would like to at the end of the show. God, I have so much I want to add on to what you just said, but I will keep it minimal. I don't know if you know this, but my husband's actually from Lisbon. So Lisbon is my home away from home. I love it there. My in-laws live there. My kids' godparents live there. So we're there a lot. Pink Street, I know well. I actually discovered Pink Street before I met my husband. My favorite bar on that street is called Pensão Amor. And it was an old brothel. And it's so cool. They host like different like artist installations and performance art. It's a really, really cool place.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't remember a single bar there because we were there from like 1 to 5 in the morning. And it's like the nerdiest late night experience when you're there for Web Summit because it's just a bunch of tech people like talking to each other but it's like I had so much fun. I was like, these people are amazing. But like, we were standing outside, drinking, talking about tech things. I don't remember a single bar on that street.
Well, maybe I'll see you there next year. My husband and I were talking about which conferences I'm going to plan to go to in 2023. And he actually suggested that one. He's like, why don't you go to Tech Summits in Lisbon? I'm like, all right.
I will say I did actually go to the conference last year, and it's very well planned. I was deeply impressed by how well put together it is and the caliber of speakers, et cetera. So definitely.
I'm so happy that you've had some time to do you and unwind. And it's so, so important. I did something similar when I was 31. So I had been working as an editor, and I met my husband on an airplane, and I decided to go live in Lisbon and just freelance. And I had a lot of time to just kind of do all the things that you were talking about, go walk around the city, take photographs, write passion project kind of stuff. Like I started to write a novel that I'll probably never finish because I'm a perfectionist and a novel is a lot of work, but it's fun. It's just so beautiful to have that space and time to be able to do that at least once in your life. So that's really cool.
Yeah. Thank you. It feels, there was a lot. Yeah. I needed it. And now I'm great.
So now you're great. And, I was researching you a bit more for this episode. And I don't know if you know this, but we actually have a lot in common. So first, we both graduated from UMass with a degree in English. Second, we were both leaders at large content marketing agencies. And third, now we've both transitioned from employee to solopreneur/marketing advisor. So I don't know, are we living a parallel life? Or what?
I think so.
No, but kidding.
Also a great life.
A great life. I mean, we're just kind of going to show that you don't always need a fancy Ivy League degree to have a successful career and happy life.
Oh, I was homeschooled. My high school diploma was a GED, so I could go to college early in Hawaii when I was 16. Like it's
awesome.
My background is bizarre. Like I do not have a business. Like I don't have an MBA. Yeah. I just did something I loved a lot. And I worked really hard at it. And I know that there's like this new like shame around working hard, but like I worked a lot, and I was very ambitious, and I was lucky enough to meet people who, and I say lucky because it's kind of true in this world, right? I was lucky enough to encounter people who gave me opportunities along the way, Walter being one of them, and the one that literally changed my life. And I hate to say that I feel lucky and I'm grateful, but you still have to say that now because it's not common. So
totally. And I joked, I was talking to Steve Watt on a recent episode of this podcast. He's Steve from Seismic. And I was giving examples just to kind of illustrate the different concepts he was talking about. And I kept talking about my last company. And at one point I had to say, I'm so sorry. I keep talking about the predictive index. I worked there for 3.5 years. I've only been quit for less than a year. And it's just still so top of mind. And like you said, they gave me so many great opportunities. And I also have that gratefulness, so it's just hard to kind of rewire your mind it takes time to kind of pull away and pull off the suction cup, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So I want to start by asking you the same question that I ask every guest who comes on the show, which is, what the fuck is thought leadership?
Love that question. I don't know. I hate the term. I like every single marketing buzzword that becomes a buzzword. I think it means nothing the more we use it. But on a very basic level, it's a subject matter expert talking about the thing they're an expert in. It's literally it. Like quite literally, thought leadership is just someone who knows a lot about something and is either building a brand around it or using it to build the brand that they work for. It's a person talking about something they know.
So why do you think it's such a misunderstood term?
It's not misunderstood. It's just stupid, right? If you're a brand and you're talking about the thing that, like the space that your product serves, it's just content marketing. Because content marketing, the premise of content marketing is helping people out, like building your company through helping people out. That was the entire premise of it. So for example, when I worked at Help Scout, we served the customer support community. We wrote I guess you could call it thought leadership on how to do customer support really well. I mean, in today's terms, you could call that thought leadership. To me, it was content marketing, right? Then we had people at the company like Matt Patterson. He had been in customer support for a long time. He would write in-depth sort of articles about various facets of, going deep in various facets of customer support. I guess you could call that thought leadership. To me, it's content marketing. It was part of a content marketing strategy that we put together and executed that served the objectives that our team was tasked with, which at the time was top of funnel. So it was traffic. And so I think it's kind of like, it's gotten this thing that I don't know, it's like, it's a term that people are using now to talk about something that already existed. When I think about thought leadership and how I might deploy that within a content strategy, if I was trying to separate it, is like a person who's an expert in something who I am leveraging to grow the brand. I think that's the only thing that would really make it unique if you think about it in that way. But I think the way a lot of people think about it and talk about it is so much more broad than that. So I think it's a useless, meaningless term. It's become a buzzword and I don't care about it. But also the way that I deploy it, I think is really important and small.
So interesting. It's the whole reason why I started this show because, thought leadership has been around a really long time. I had a guest on the show who actually dated it back to Confucius, right? Like they literally sit around and think and share their thoughts. And that's thought leadership at its essence. It's a thing that's been around forever. But at least for me, I didn't really start hearing about it a lot in the marketing world until about 3 years ago. And it was a slow drip. And it was like, drip. Oh, I noticed that, this freelance writer is selling thought leadership content. Drip. Oh, I'm getting a prospect reach out to me. They want me to help them write thought leadership. Like drip. It was kind of like a faucet, just dripping little bits and blips. And now it's everywhere. I actually, right before I hopped on this call with you, I was on a call with a guy named Alan Alper. So he works for a company that does thought leadership strategy for big corporations. And he's like, there's 200,000 people that have some variation of the word thought leadership in their LinkedIn headline. That's wild. So there's so many people.
PR too. To me, if you're doing thought leadership for a big corporation, I'm pretty sure that's just PR. You're writing, getting thoughts out, you're growing brand awareness by sharing your expert thoughts, hopefully that are newsworthy in some way, either to news outlets, talk shows, podcasts, or your audience, right? And that's where it's sort of the owned media side, right? But I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like it doesn't really, it's such a broad thing and it doesn't really feel like it needs to be separated because there's so many tactics within thought leadership that people talk about, some of which are just content marketing, some of which are just PR, some of which is just influencer strategy. And so it's like, why do we need this bucket? I think it's just a way to sell product. It's like what happened with storytelling. I used to call myself a storyteller when I was early in my career because I quite literally would stand up on stage and tell stories in front of groups of people. And it was called storytelling. They were like competitions, kind of like the Moth. I did it in Boston. And so that's what kind of got me into, partial of what got me into marketing. I love to write. I love to tell stories. And so that was sort of the way I branded myself within the marketing space.
Oh, I never knew that. That's so cool.
Now you can't use that word because it's been used to the ad nauseum to the point where it means nothing. So
it's kind of like how I used to feel back in the 90s and the early 2000s. I'd discover a band first. I'd be listening to it. And then 3 years later, everyone was listening to it. And I'm like, shit, I can't listen to this band anymore. Now I hate it because everyone's listening to it. So you were the OG storyteller.
I mean, look, I'm not trying to be, I don't want to be elitist or whatever. I don't think that no one's ever the first at anything in reality because everybody, even the word, somebody had to have said it to me first, right? I'm no OG anything. I'm a follower just like everybody else. We're all a product of the world that we operate in and are influenced by. But I am a fan of getting more specific. And actually, that's something that I was enhanced in me at Animals through Walter and his approach. He never let you get away with saying anything vague. Never, it was like, you had to really like, you had to say exactly what you meant. And I think that's how I think it's like, what do you mean at this specific company with our specific objectives? What do you mean by thought leadership? What are you specifically going to do?
I love that. I actually have migrated my content brief many times over the years. So I just like make my own kind of briefs, and occasionally I'll help clients make those. And I have a whole section that's all about like, what's unique to us? Like, what can we say? Like, what's our position on this? And a lot of brands don't think about that. They're just like, okay, so we want to educate you on how to write a blog post. So here is how to write a blog post. But it's like the same thing that a million other companies could write. And it's like, well, why are we saying this? Like, why do we care about this? And what's our position on this? And what does everyone in the industry, like, what's that commonly held advice that we like vehemently disagree with? And we're like, this is bullshit. Like, this is why we're writing this blog, right? So it has to be specific and something that you can speak to as a brand. And if you don't have like a position, I don't know, like maybe write something that's a little more relevant and interesting, because if you're writing the same generic stuff, that's boring. I mean, there's so much good
And this
content.
is again why like thought leadership is kind of a useless generic term, because my friend Doug Fox, who's a legendary branding guy, he would say, yeah, it's called branding and positioning. Like that's something that you do for a brand. And I think this like, look, not to get all meta, but I think this is kind of part of what startups this whole startup world came through, and it was all about making things go faster. Starting a company used to be really dense, and they're like, listen, you can, get that money, get going, show track, blah, blah, blah. And so like part of a company coming to life would be like branding and positioning. Like, what is our unique position in the market? What are we doing differently from our competitors, et cetera, et cetera? That used to be part of the process. And look, it still is, because all these agencies and people still exist and have jobs, and like there are companies still doing it. I think it's just like with startups, it's happening later. It's happening, or if it's happening at all, they're not necessarily as equipped to follow through on it, et cetera. So, things like brand guidelines, that happens a lot of companies later. That's why I loved Help Scout so much, because they had them, they cared about that. They understood the importance of that. It's how like I credit the growth of their brand early on to their understanding of that. So yeah, I 100% agree. Like positioning is really important. And that is one thing that executing thought leadership broadly does, is like it forces you to have an opinion, and opinions help you stand out if your opinion is interesting, actually.
And not all opinions are that interesting. Not everyone should try to be a thought leader. Like it's okay to not be. I just actually went through this in the newsletter that went out today. I'm like, like the bottom of the pyramid is subject matter expertise. And it's the biggest piece of the pyramid because it's the one thing that most of us can do. Most of us can be subject matter experts. And that's great. Like, I talked to Tracy from Klaviyo, and she said, if you just put out this great expertise, authoritative, trustworthy content, over time, you can start to have people see you as a thought leader. Whereas the other school of marketers and experts believe that thought leadership is about big ideas, net new ideas. And that's why I do this freaking podcast, because I want to get this robust picture for people and help people wrap their heads around, different ways to become known as a thought leader. And like you said, you're talking about thought leader in terms of a person. A lot of people and companies speak about thought leaders in terms of the company. You're trying to have your company be a thought leader. And of course, within that, you're going to be creating authoritative, interesting content that builds trust. And you're probably going to have some bylines, speaking sessions, podcast appearances from your executives who are those true subject matter experts with those innovative ideas, right? You're going to kind of have those motions working together.
It's content marketing.
Right. And positioning
all
and
is.
brand and all of it.
Yeah. Like Help Scout, I deployed a content marketing strategy that positioned Help Scout as a leader in customer support excellence and education. That's what we did. It was a brand, right? Same with animals, right? Like animals, and that it didn't start with me. Obviously, we had the blog. So Jimmy Daly really started that path of like animals is a company that, produces the best content marketing in the world and are the, leaders in what that is. And we proved that it could be a brand thing because Jimmy left, not left. Like he started his own company in the Walter Inc. universe, Superpath. And then we had someone on the team, Ryan Law, who started running the blog and does an excellent job maintained the brand perception that Animals is the best, authority on content marketing. Right. And so like I think that's extremely valuable, but that's content marketing. To me, I'm like, that's still content marketing. I think thought leadership and I think that the thing that I have always been wary of is growing, as you're trying to grow a brand, leaning too hard on individuals at the brand to grow it who aren't like founders or like core to the business. Because again, if they leave, that puts the brand at risk, right? But at the same time, that's kind of what works now, right? Yeah. Like organic social media for B2B SaaS is completely useless. Like don't do it. Like you don't need to manage your company accounts. But people at brands are really good at building community and growing brand awareness. So it's both like a necessary, but also risky.
Yeah.
But that's just where things are at right now. Nobody felt like when I started in community management, it was like everyone followed SaaS brands. It was like the thing to do. They were hot. They were, cool. They were hip. Now it's like they're all stodgy and no one cares. So it's like you kind of have to take the individual approach.
People tend to take more risks than the brand is willing to take. People
Which
tend
is
to
great.
speak
Right?
their mind.
Yeah.
But those of us who do speak our mind, it's like you walk that thin line between what if I get a lot of hate on this opinion and it's going to damage the brand, So do you have any opinions there on like what's the right amount of authenticness to show and when you're working for a company so that you can build that audience and be authentic, but yet not damage the brand in any way? Do you have any thoughts on that?
You have to. I do. Like a month ago, I don't know where I said it, but I was like, I think blogs are dead. They're pointless. Like I never would have said that at Animals because the belief behind that is nuanced. It's not that I think we're not going to use blogs anymore. And I never would have said that at Animals because it's too complicated. And the soundbite would have been, Animals CEO. If anyone cared about me enough to publish anything about me, which they didn't, but like, it would be like CEO of Animals, like, thinks blogs aren't useful anymore. And it's like, so I do believe strongly that if you are a visible person in the company, you do need to think about what you say. I also don't think that you have to be as curated as, say, a politician or an actor or something. I think in the business world, there's more space for you to have contrarian opinions. And that actually is what elevates you. So I don't think it's like, look at the brand guidelines and only say company messaging. I think that, you kind of have to be contrarian to stand out. I didn't say a lot when I was CEO.
Yeah, I get that. And it's kind of freeing to be able to now say what you want to say. And
there's different ways of being authentic, right?
Yeah.
So there are restrictions. Like the world has constraints. It's fine. We don't have to freak out about it, right? So maybe publicly you have to be, 30% more constrained. But you can still be authentic with your peers and in groups and events, like other places where you're not kind of shouting from the rooftops.
Yeah.
Those are places where nuanced discussions can be had, where, you can say what you mean. There's no sound bites, there's no recording. So I think, it's just about being smart about what you say, where you say it. And just, you have friends if you want to say everything.
Yeah, I always said, like, I'm like 90% of real me on social media, but like truthfully, maybe less, because that's like the 10% that I would only say to my true friends that I wouldn't say out and about in the community, right? So maybe like, I swear I dropped the F-bomb on this podcast, but when I'm with my friends, I might be dropping the F-bomb every 5 minutes because, hey, my mother was like a trucker. So that's just like in my DNA. But, I also used to teach. I used to work at a school. I never swore. Like I can turn it on and off depending on who I'm around. And I think that is really an important life skill for people to learn, because even though I do dial myself down quite a bit when I'm speaking publicly or communicating through words on social media, something I notice is that people will insert their own opinions into things that you're saying so that they almost like twist your words to fit their point of view, their experience, their journey. And it's a really bizarre thing. Like a lot of times, I remember one time I was talking about my process for hiring writers. So I've been hiring writers for over a decade. I help my clients hire writers. That's like one thing that I love to do. I was sharing this is my process. And I was talking about how for full-time roles, I will give the top candidates a skills test, like a writing test. And I never said if it was paid or unpaid. I just used the word writing test. I had so many people like jump down my throat to say like, you should never give a test and I'm never going to take a test and you need to pay people for a test. And I'm like, yo, I didn't even ever say any details. Like you're just projecting that onto me, which is fine. Like I can take the heat. Like I'm going to keep showing up even if you try to put me down because I got thick skin. I am a writer after all, but that's another thing that people need to be aware of is that when you're speaking into the void, even if you're not saying something, people will take your narrative and kind of twist it to fit what they've been through. And I almost feel bad for these people because I know that they've been burned. They've been used and abused. And I'm like, yo, I get why you're saying this. Like, I am not going to ever use or abuse any writer. Like, I actually stand up for writers all the time, but they don't know that about me. I might have just made it into their feed for the first time. So that's the tough thing about social media. And,
I'm afraid of it. Like especially as a CEO, I was very cognizant because even internally, same thing. I would be like, wait, people would have these beliefs. I'm like, that's not even true.
Yeah.
And it's interesting the things that can be perpetuated without any nurture. And it even extends beyond, like it continues on. It's bizarre to me. It's a very interesting time. The way people act and are publicly is flabbergasting to me and deeply inappropriate. And it's as if, it's a really weird, like the external behavior is very, I would never have acted that way when I was trying to be employed.
And as a CEO, like you said, you should be concerned with how you are perceived, because at the end of the day, if you say something that totally blows the lid off your business, there are people that could lose their jobs. So there's a lot of weight on the shoulders of a CEO or a president or a senior executive, which is why they're so scared.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Internally
too.
That was actually more challenging than external.
Oh, that's such a good point.
The way I think there's also just like people in general right now, like it's generally a hostile world right now. And so, but yeah, I had to be very, very careful because the amount of things that were decided and believed were astonishing.
And you talked earlier about, there's a lot of hostility around working hard and burnout culture and all of that. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's like the quiet quitting, which I'm old. So for me, quiet quitting is just like doing the bare minimum at your job. And like, that's fine too. Like, as long as you're doing what they're paying you to do. I'm not that person. I'm always a person who's like above and beyond. Like, even though you didn't ask me to do this, I'm going to do this thing. That's just how I am. So I'm probably more susceptible to that kind of burnout culture, hard work. It's how I was raised, whatever. But at the same time, when you try to say that I really do believe in this, like work your ass off if you want to succeed, you're never going to succeed by quiet quitting. Let's say that's my opinion, but I'm like too scared to say that. So I'm going to find the balance so I don't offend anyone. And I'm like, work hard, but don't work so hard that you burn out. That's like the most boring message ever. Like, don't even freaking say that. Like, why even bother opening your mouth if you're not going to have an actual opinion because you're just watering it down? You might as well stay quiet, or you might as well stay away from opinions and just teach people what you know, because that's an easy way.
Unpack it, right?
Or unpack it.
Like, what do you, I actually don't, first of all, I think quiet quitting is like the lamest. Like, I don't even understand what that means. If it means doing your job, then it's just doing your job.
I
Like,
think it means doing the bare
you do,
minimum, I think.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, but if you're fulfilling the duties of your job, then you're doing your job. You're not quiet quitting.
Yeah.
If you're being passive aggressive and doing less than and compromising the well-being of your coworkers, you know, the company that pays you, like, I think that's just extremely pathetic. Because like, if you have a problem, deal with it. And if your company is not serving you, leave and find the culture and company that works for you.
Right.
Like, I think it's the most pathetic way to act if you're going to be like doing something passive aggressive to get what you want. And I think particularly, so it's not even worth talking about, period. But if you do have strong opinions in that nuanced space of like the balance between working and moving up in your career and burnout, come up with an opinion that that will serve people. Come up with a hot take and share that and build your brand on that. Like, that's an opportunity, right? And it's like, you don't have to just be anti something. What about being pro something else?
Yeah.
And then now you've got a brand opportunity there, right? Instead of saying like, I think people that work hard, you know, like, buds, burn it. You know, it's like, that's not a stance.
Right.
It's an anti-stance. So it's like, I think it's a missed opportunity for, it's like, tell me what you're for then. And now you will have followers.
Tell me what you're for then. Just want to repeat that because that's such a key point and a key takeaway for the listeners. Don't be vanilla about it. Find an interesting way to take a stance and tell you what you're for. Don't just be like, I'm for working hard, but not too hard. That's boring, right? Tell people what you're for in a way that's sticky and memorable and that they want to maybe transition the way that they've been working because maybe they're feeling burnout and they don't really know what to do because also they don't want to be a quiet quitter. Maybe like us, they're just like hate all those terms. I feel like there's like a new term every time I freaking open the social media Facebook feed. I'm like, oh, a new article with a new term. Like, I can't keep up with it. I hate it. Like, just do your job. And if you want to go above and beyond, do it. Great. You'll probably climb the ladder quicker. If you don't want to do that because you don't want the extra stress, okay, cool. Like, you do you, right?
Be a strong individual contributor. There's like, every company needs, what do they call it? Like pioneers, town settlers, and something else. It's like, you know, the pioneers are probably going to be the people who want to, you know, are volunteering for quote unquote extra work. It's really just extra responsibility because they have goals. They want to get somewhere. Cool.
Right.
There's other people who are like, listen, I care about what I do, or I care an amount about what I do, and I love to do it, or I'm happy to do it. And that's it. I'm like, those people are great. You need those people who are just going to focus forward. You don't, if everyone in your company wanted to move, you know what I mean? You're like, yeah, that's stressful, right? You got to find places for those people or lose them because they, you know, you don't have the space. So I think there's room for both. I think you can brand yourself on both, but following the buzzy anti-messaging alone isn't a stance. It's not going to help you stand out. And I think right now, especially among like the sort of like work related banter, it's the anti category is saturated, oversaturated. What's the pro category? And a realistic pro, like, you know, what would a positive future look like? How do you get there? What do people need to learn? What do companies need to learn? What do leaders need to what do workers need to learn? What is it? You know what I mean? It's like, tell me that path. Don't just say like, we should only work 30 hours a week and get paid twice as much. I'm like, can you explain that math equation to me?
Yes.
Do the math. Show me a company. Show me how that works in the math. Right. And I'm like, then you've got me interested. Or like, show me how you think about figuring out the math. Say you don't know the math, but you're trying to look into it. Like that's interesting to me. Right. Mm-hmm. Like the sort of top level, you know, oh, it should be X or Y. I'm like, have you ever tried to do X or Y? Because let me tell you, it's really hard.
Right.
It is really, really hard to like run a company, period.
Yep.
let alone do progressive things that don't fit the mold of current structure.
Right.
So like, how? You've got me hooked. If you talk about how, you've got me hooked.
Especially in a business with thin margins, which a lot of service businesses do have.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, oh yeah, let's just work less and pay you more. That's smart. But people have opinions.
It's just,
opinions are like
you know,
assholes.
it's not, those are people that you're sort of like, at this point, I'm like trying to avoid. I'm like,
Yeah.
you're not saying anything. You don't even know what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The people I'm interested in following are people who are like, I'm trying to understand this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I came up like, I'm having a problem and I don't even know how to solve it, but like, or I do know how to solve it, but I haven't solved it. You know, like I want to talk to people who are like exploring things, who are, because true vulnerability, like the same people who are talking about like, you know, expecting other people to be vulnerable are the same ones who are like being kind of shamey publicly. And it's like, I want to talk to people who are like, you know, I straight up said on LinkedIn when I was CEO, I was like, I feel deep shame when I make a mistake. Like those are the types of things I want to hear. And the people came to me saying, oh my gosh, like, thank you for saying that out loud. I've been feeling that forever. And I've never been able to like say it out loud. And I was like, yeah, I want to hear more of that and have people be like rally around a question rather than say, you know, point fingers. And
I love that. And I know that you hate the word thought leadership or the term, which is fine. You know,
you're being anti.
But I would argue that doing that, putting your ideas, your half-baked ideas out there, collecting feedback, showing people what you're working on, that's part of thought leadership. Like it's building those big ideas. It's not just having them like, hurrah, like let me put the crown on my head. I've been working in this industry for 20 years and I have a big idea. How did you get there? What were all the pieces? What was your investigative process? You know, I think that is really interesting too. You know, I read a book by David Baker and I really love what he said in that. He went on this quest where he took the time to understand deeply all these things he had questions about. And he had like this writing practice, and every day he would do more research and more writing. And by the end of it, he really deeply understood these subjects. Imagine if we shared that documentation and that learning, and some of us are, but the more we share and the more that we can be vulnerable, you know, while still owning that, I definitely discovered Daddy Yankee on a vacation to Puerto Rico, and I brought the CD back to all my friends. So I am going to own that. But otherwise, I mean, I'm all for being vulnerable. Somebody just DM'd me this morning and was like, hey, I loved your newsletter. And I was vulnerable right in that DM. I wasn't like, I know I'm so great. I was like, man, I got to tell you, I have so much anxiety on the day my newsletter goes out. There's something that hits different about a newsletter. It's not like a social post. Those can bomb. Those can get hate. I'm like, whatever. Like a newsletter feels different. It feels more intimate. I'm in your inbox. There's a lot of like emotion attached to that, you know? So that's something that I should probably share because I'm sure people would love to know that about me. And, you know, me too, I struggled with that, or I'm still struggling with that, or here's how I got over that. That's not thought leadership. I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but that's just something that I believe in is interesting as well and can help you build that. I hate the word audience too, because an audience seems like all you care about is like speaking and not receiving feedback. I picture like an audience. I'm up on stage and I'm speaking and you're just like, whoa, yay, like you're amazing. Like that's why I kind of hate the word audience, but it does describe what we're talking about.
Bringing people around you based on the things, your beliefs and what you're saying. And they don't necessarily all believe what you believe,
right?
But they're interested in the thing that you are talking about and want to share their perspective. Also, like, want to totally acknowledge that you absolutely called me out because, like, you're totally right. What I am talking about is thought leadership, and I'm quite literally doing it. So fair enough. Come full circle. Love that. And I also just wanted to like connect on one last thing you said, which is I get so much anxiety when I post on LinkedIn. I post it and sometimes I like have to close my computer. It's less so now that I don't run a company because I was always worried about like sort of the team, like the mob, but now I don't care. So it's fine, you know, but I get really nervous, right? Like putting myself out there. most of it's internal.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you're putting your thoughts, you're putting your heart, and you're writing,
Yeah.
which I take so, like, writing is literally, the name Devin means poet in Gaelic. Like, I have been writing since I couldn't spell. And
yeah, you got an English degree. You're a born writer. All of us that have that English degree, we wanted to go to college and spend 4 years writing and reading. Like, that says a lot about our true love for writing. That's what we have in common.
Also, can I just tell you that I was very slow to learn how to read? I'm like it is the most shocking thing in the world that I ended up running a company, because I was so slow to learn to read that the people around my parents were sort of saying, like, she needs to go into a special program to, like, whatever. My parents just said she will learn when she's ready. And they were right. I, like, picked up a book one day and then never took my face out of one. But I also struggled to spell too, to the point where the teacher, I went to public school for a short time when I was young, and the teacher had to bring my parents in and work on a program to help me, because I was failing all the spelling tests. So it is very funny that my passion was something I wasn't actually, like, naturally fundamentally good at.
Yeah.
And end up, is my reason for being alive.
Yeah. I mean, everyone
I also
develops
only read fiction
different.
books.
You
Everyone's
only
like,
read.
"Did you read the latest business book?" I'm like, no.
I love it. I mean, so this is also off topic, but do you happen to remember, like, your favorite English course or professor
Literature.
or book? It was just English lit.
It was English lit with my professor. Oh my gosh, Neil O'Grady, I think it was. We would unpack, like, stanzas of poems, like just one little piece for an entire class. He introduced me to my favorite poem by Elizabeth Bishop, which I know to literary folks is going to be, like, everyone knows this poem if you're a literature person, but it's called One Art by Elizabeth Bishop. And I just loved to geek out on what went on behind a story, what went on behind a piece of poetry. I wish I could take literature classes for the rest of my life and not get tested on it. I just want to go to those classes, read the books, and discuss them with, like, literature people, because it's fascinating.
Totally. So I'm not as much into poetry, but I'm into analyzing texts, like fiction, analyzing song lyrics. So I used to teach summer school at a DYS facility. So teenagers that were unfortunately detained and locked up, they had to be in a locked, secured facility. And I wanted to make the summer school fun for them as much as possible. So I actually would work with them on analyzing song lyrics, hip hop lyrics, rap lyrics, as much as I could find stuff that was, like, enough appropriate, like, at the level that I could bring it into a school. It was the best thing. And these kids, like, opened up and they would journal and they would share their interpretations. And, like, they have a lot going on, even though they don't share it in, like, the normal traditional, like, raise my hand and talk about Moby Dick. Like, you got to find other ways to reach people, because we're all different.
That's so cool.
It was a blast.
Like poetry, because I don't read a lot of poetry, but I do some. And the poetry and song lyrics are like Rubik's Cubes to me. They're like mysteries. There's so much within a single word or a single line that I always feel dumb when I read it. Cause I'm like, there was a woman who worked at Animals who was a poet, and I had bought her 2 poetry books. And she and I and one of our employees, we have these poetry chats where fun. Like we would pick a poem from her book, and she would help us, like, understand it, unpack it. We would share what we interpreted from it. And it was so much fun, because that's, it helps me immerse it. It helped me understand it and appreciate it more. And so.
That sounds fun. That's part of your passion project. And my friends and I, we're on the other side of 40 now. We just did a girls' trip to Vermont recently. And one of my friends, she's calling this phase of her life, she's like, my golden age. I'm like, you're not in your golden years, but which is like, we just joke about being like old ladies, but really having the times of our lives, because we have all worked so goddamn hard that we're still working hard, but in a different way. Like, we're able to take off a Thursday and Friday and go to the spa in Vermont together and sit in the hot tub. And, we're able to carve out space and time to explore our interests. Like a lot of us are into like metaphysical stuff, and we're like, we have our pendulums and we're doing pendulum readings, and we have our oracle cards, and we're doing all these like nerdy golden girl old lady things, and it's the goddamn best. And like, honestly, reaching a certain point in your life is also freeing. So anyway, we're off topic. I know we're going up on time. So one last question. And then I will, let you go on with your day. I'd love to know, is there a person or a company that puts out great content that you would consider like content that generates or drives thought leadership?
Yes. Actually, the example I have is a company that isn't actually producing a lot of content right now, but I like their approach to content is, I think, correct and smart. So the company is called SaaSworks, and they make a product for CFOs, and they are taking what I think is a really smart approach, which is one, they really understand who they're selling to and what their problems are, because they not only did the research themselves over the course of a year, but then they hired a research company to go talk to CFOs one-to-one.
Oh.
And go even deeper. So they did their own homework by connecting with the people that they're serving, and then also hired this research agency. And the approach they took, the strategy was, I thought, really smart. So they were like, we don't want to be talking heads. We want to surface the people we want to surface the problem statement and these CFOs who need. And so they published the research. They did sort of market research. So there's really in-depth article on the whole problem, the space, et cetera. And then the third aspect was sort of like their perspective, which was highlighted through a podcast that they were on. And I just think that like that was a really cool way to do it, because they didn't make it about them. They made it about the people they're serving and the problem those people are solving. So the hero of that was CFOs and this big problem that they have versus the product or the people making the product. And I think that's brilliant. I think that's a brilliant strategy. I think it's generous in the way it should be generous. And I think in the age of like, we've gotten so influencer focused to the point where there's like micro influencers, right? And like there's so many different terms. They're like, no. It's not about us. It's about the people we're trying to help. I'm like, great, love it. Wow, like, amazing. Right. So I thought that was a brilliant, because it's thought, like if we're talking thought leadership, it's putting the thought first.
Love that. I will link to that in the show notes. And I also would love to dive into that myself after the call and maybe kind of give some information in a newsletter. And the newsletter that features this episode, Devin, will dive into this and, break it down for the people.
Yes.
Because it's all about the people. It's not about...
Will Bostony is the guy behind that.
Okay.
So he has lots to say on that.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So, Devin, if people would like to follow you or learn about these secret projects that you have coming up in the new year, where can they do that?
Probably LinkedIn, or just like, I don't know. I'm sure my email's out in the world somewhere, but like LinkedIn's pretty much the only place I talk. So
okay,
that's, there.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been fun. I'm sure we could talk for 5 more hours, but we do have marketing to do and clients to serve and ornaments to make and Target runs. I got to run to Target. Mm-hmm. So thank you. This has been awesome. And I know that the listeners are really going to enjoy this episode.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Notorious Thought Leader. If you're looking for more stories from marketers who are generating demand from thought leadership, then visit us at motionagency.io/notorious. See you next time.